Hello everybody, Lord Sando here. Today's video is going to be a bit different. This is going to be my Deepwoken Ultimate Overview. Pretty much, it's going to be the most basic information about the game, summarized into one video. The purpose of this is that you can send it to someone who hasn't heard of Deepwoken or someone with very little knowledge of the game, and they should be able to get a good understanding of what it's about. I'll leave the timestamps to the different topics that I'm going to be covering in the description, so if you want to skip over the stuff that doesn't interest you, you can do that. Just to let you know, I won't be citing every piece of information that I use in this video, but if you want to know where I got them from, then ask me a specific question in the comments. If this video helps you to understand a bit more about the game, then please do me the kind favor of subscribing to the channel because I will be posting Deepwoken content when the game releases. Without further ado, let's get into the video. So the first thing I want to talk about to introduce you to the game of Deepwoken is specifically what the game's going to be about. So Deepwoken is going to be an open world, sea-based exploration and fighting game. The game features permadeath mechanics, meaning that if you die in a certain way or a certain number of times, then you'll lose some of the progress that you grinded for in your previous life. This, coupled with the fact that Deepwoken has one of the most skill-based combat systems on the platform, makes the game quite difficult and hardcore for some people. Deepwoken at the time of recording is currently in the year 1262, or the 13th century, and most of the buildings and technologies are reminiscent of that time period. Deepwoken is meant to be semi-realistic, so there's going to be features like fall damage and hunger, but at the same time there's elements of fantasy such as magic. We've been given a few hints about the lore, but the owner said that you'll have to discover most of the lore for yourself while playing the game. Speaking of the owners, Deepwoken is made by two famous developers, Ragusa and Archmage. They're most well known for their popular game, Rogue Lineage, but you shouldn't let this discourage you from being hyped for Deepwoken if you didn't like Rogue, because the games are completely separate and they aren't going to be similar at all. Deepwoken is set to release in 2021, and is likely to release next month in December. Alright, so the next topic that I want to mention is races. So when you create a character in Deepwoken, you'll be given a random race. They all look quite different and they are all based off animals. If you're unhappy with the race that you got, you can re-roll it for Robux and get a new race, or you can make a new character slot, which will give you a different race. So while races are mainly going to be a cosmetic thing, they do provide some advantages. It's not entirely clear what these advantages are going to be, but the developers have said that they're going to be very small, like a tiny stat increase. Officially, we know of 9 races in Deepwoken, though there is some speculation that more exists. There's the Khan race, which is based off monkeys. There's the Gremel race, which is based off deers. There's the Etrian race, which is based off snakes. The Ganymede race, which looks like it's based off yokais. The Vesperian race, which is based off beetles. The Felinor race, which is based off cats. The Celtor race, which is based off raccoons. The Atret race, which is based off seemingly humans. And the Canor race, which is based off either humans or dogs. Alright, now let's talk a bit about the melee combat. So the combat in Deepwoken is pretty unique compared to what we've seen from other Roblox games. Melee combat in this game is pretty much based off reactions and predictions. When you click your left mouse button, you'll do a swing with your weapon. If your opponent isn't blocking, then it will hit them and they'll take damage. If your opponent is blocking, then they won't take damage, but their posture bar, which is this yellow bar, will increase. If your opponent parries the attack, which they can do by holding F and left clicking, then their posture will go down and your posture will go up. If you right click while you're in the middle of a swing, then you can cancel the swing. This is called feinting. And if you hit your enemy with your swings 3 times in a row, then they'll get hit with the special animation, which is called a flourish. When the yellow posture bar fills up, you'll be guard broken, which basically means you'll be stunned and the enemy can damage you. So basically melee combat in Deepwoken is going to be pretty complex, because you're going to have to read when your opponent is going to parry and feint accordingly, and attempt to chip at the enemy's health while managing your own posture. Deepwoken's combat is not stun based, unlike games like Rogue Lineage, which means that if you try to hit someone more than once in a row, then they can parry you back. While we're on the topic of melee combat, let's talk a bit about the weapons that you can get in Deepwoken. So in Deepwoken you have 2 weapon slots. You can hold 1 weapon in your left hand and 1 weapon in your right hand, but you can also one-hand weapons if you want to, and it comes with its own advantage. There are lots of different types of weapons in Deepwoken, ranging from greatswords to axes to longswords to flintlocks and shields. If you're wondering how flintlocks work, then they're basically the same thing as melee weapons, but they have a bit longer range. They can only attack twice in a row before pausing though. and shields in this game presumably increase the max amount of posture that you can take. So you can't just equip whatever weapon you want, there are certain stat requirements for each weapon. For example, the parrying dagger requires 10 agility, so you have to grind for those stats if you want to get that weapon. Some weapons have slower animations and have longer range than others, and some do more damage. The one that you choose will pretty much determine your playstyle. You can have one primary weapon and one offhand weapon. The only offhand weapons that we know of are daggers, flintlocks, and shields. Everything else is a primary weapon and cannot be used in both hands. There seem to be different tiers of weapons. For example, you can get an endgame dagger, which is the weapon that Infinasu is using currently. Alright, now let's move on to magic combat. So in Deepwoken, as well as your melee weapons, magic is going to be an integral part of your combat. It's like the cherry on top of your cake. You can have a certain playstyle based on how you like to play, and the magic is going to help augment that. If you like to be fast and up in your enemy's face, then you might want to get Thundercall, because it has a spell which covers you in a lightning cloak and allows you to run really fast. If you want to do parkour, or you want to be a nuisance to your enemies, then you're probably going to like Gale Breath, because Gale Breath has a spell which allows you to double jump, and a spell which ragdolls enemies and can send them flying across the map. All of the elements have their own types of combat spells, and in Deepwoken you're going to be using that to your advantage to help further your playstyle. For example, Nano Prodigy, who's known as one of the best testers in the game, has shown off some pretty sick combos that he's done with Flame Charm. There's a spell mechanic which I'll refer to as perfect casting. So on certain spells you'll hear the sound cue, and if you click it at the right time, then the spell will be sped up and you can cancel it. So most spells will do direct damage to your enemy. Some of them you can block with your weapon and others you can't. That doesn't mean that you have to eat the damage for free though, because there's a mechanic called venting. Venting is sort of like parrying but for spells. If you time it at the correct moment, then it's gonna push you back a little bit and you won't take any damage from the spell. You can't really spam spells either, because there's this Ether bar, which is basically like mana, and when it goes to 0 then you can't use any spells. So spells are nice tools to help you in combat, but at the end of the day, if you try and use them as a crutch because you're bad at the melee combat, they're not going to help you because your opponent can just vent the moves. They're best used in mix-ups like Nano Prodigy showed off, and you should try and get them off when your opponent is pressured and they're not expecting it. So when you cast a spell in Deepwoken, you're not committed to that action. Just like your swings, you can cancel the spell animation by right-clicking. The main purpose of this is that you can cancel your spell and then swing or use a different spell to catch your enemy off guard. The last thing I want to mention is that there are ritual spells which provide large effects on a battle or something outside a battle, but they require a long time to cast. I believe the first example of a ritual spell that we saw was this time slow spell. So in Deepwoken there are 4 official types of elements. There's Thundercall, Frost Draw, Flame Charm, and Gale Breath. We've also seen a Shadow Magic in game, but I'm hesitant to put it in the same category as these elements because GUIS did say that there are likely to be 4 elements on release. This makes me believe that there might be sub-magics, or abilities which aren't tied to any specific element. In terms of magic progression, you start with 1 element, but you can actually get at least 1 more by doing something to unlock it in the world. In terms of spell creation, there's a lot of diversity. When you're creating a spell, you can modify it to change its properties. So while spells might have the same base projectiles and animations, they can do completely different things. For example, there's this wind spell, and if you modify it, then you can make it pull enemies towards you, or you could have it push enemies away from you. It's really your choice. Now let's talk a bit about the different GUIs in Deepwoken. So this little white bar is called the reservoir, and when you lose your Ether, then it takes Ether away from the reservoir to regen, and when the reservoir goes to 0, then you can't regen your Ether anymore. The long green bar above that is the Ether. These 4 circles are cooldown indicators such as fainting, parrying, and rolling. The white bar above it is the armor durability, and when you take damage that bar slowly depletes, and if it goes to 0 then your armor will be broken. The red bar is obviously your health. If it goes to 0 then you'll be knocked down and you can be executed and you can die. The yellow bar above it is the posture bar, as we mentioned before. So the 3 bars on the left hand side of the screen are your blood bar, your thirst bar, and your hunger bar. It's not entirely confirmed what any of these bars do when they're depleted to 0, but we do know that you gain thirst and hunger by eating and drinking. When the blood bar is low, it likely stops your health regeneration. This would stop people from fighting for an excessive amount of time, and it makes the game a bit more realistic. So this leaderboard that you see at the top right of the screen is the player list, and there's this feature called the Stranger feature, and basically if you haven't seen someone in game before, then they'll appear as strangers and you won't be able to see their names. Okay, so now let's move on to crafting. So crafting is going to play a pretty big role in Deepwoken. You can access the crafting menu by opening your inventory. You are not given the recipes for each of the stuff that you can make, so you have to figure these out yourself. We don't know too many recipes, but one which is confirmed is a glider, and it's pretty likely that you can make a mobile campfire as well. Deepwoken has woodcutting axes and pickaxes, as well as a place called Miner's Landing, so there's probably going to be a few more recipes that you can make which are going to be quite important. So there's also a Blacksmith NPC in Deepwoken. He gives you 3 dialogue options. One is you can ask him to craft you something, the second is that you can ask him to repair your armor, and the third is that you can ask him to build something with schematics. The armor repair one simply increases your white bar, the armor durability, back to full, so long as you paid the blacksmith a certain price. The craft something for me is likely to be weapons, and the schematics are anyone's guess. Next, let's talk about alchemy. So in Deepwoken, you have the ability to make potions. If you combine 5 ingredients, then it brews a potion for you. For example, putting 5 gobletos into a cauldron makes a regeneration potion. But you can modify the effects of your potions by adding different ingredients to that potion. For example, adding a certain amount of gobletos and a different ingredient will allow you to increase the duration of the regeneration potion. As well as being able to use the potions on yourself, you can actually throw them and use them as combat weapons. We don't know the effects of throwing potions or how viable it is, but it looks like a good way to mix up from just magic and melee combat. The next mechanic I'm going to talk about is fishing. So fishing is going to be in Deepwoken, and to use it you're going to need a rod and some bait. You then click the key that the bait is on, and then click on the fishing rod, and then click somewhere in the sea. And when you see a fish bites your bait, then you want to do the character inputs, such as WASD, based on the direction that your character is shaking. If you do this successfully, you'll be able to catch a fish. This is a good way to replenish your hunger bar if you don't have any food. It's also been stated that you can get unique items from fishing, but we don't know much about that mechanic. Okay, next let's talk about time and seasons. So Deepwoken follows a scaled down version of real time. For every 4 real life days that Deepwoken is open, 1 year in game passes. This means that every day is a new season. In the winter there's going to be a drought and it will be much harder to get food, so you'll have to stock up beforehand. Deepwoken is currently in the year 1262, and for every year in real life, approximately 90 years passes in Deepwoken. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out and if the environment actually changes over time. So in Deepwoken, the main method of transportation will be through ships. The map is segmented into islands, so if you want to get across the sea, then you have to use ships. Sailing in Deepwoken is pretty interesting because there's an actual wind pattern, and if you're traveling towards the direction of the wind, your sails align with that, then you're going to travel much faster, and if you're traveling away from the wind, then you're going to travel slower. You can use this to your advantage while planning a trip, or pursuing or escaping enemies. Deepwoken will have some form of ship customization, and you'll be able to change the ship based on what you need for your voyage. We've seen mounted cannons on ships, so if you're about to go into battle versus a warring faction, then you might want to equip cannons to your ship. Otherwise, if you're just trying to travel a long distance, then you probably won't need them. We don't really know how you make ships, but you probably either buy them or you craft them with the help of some NPC, maybe using the wood that you've gotten from the woodcutting axe. As well as ships, there are also air gliders, which I mentioned before. These allow you to travel long distances through the air, but you do lose altitude over time, so you can't stay in the air forever. It also allows you to negate fall damage if you're jumping from a high place. Gliders have some form of durability, so you have to craft a new one once yours gets worn out. There are quite a lot of options for parkour in Deepwoken. Jumping against a wall allows you to get an extra jump, and jumping on the side of a ledge allows you to get over it. If you run and crouch while you're on a downhill sloped platform, then you can actually slide. As well as this, there are also environmental tools such as zip lines, which allows you to get across the map quite easily. So the next thing I want to talk about, progression, is arguably the most important thing to take a note of, because for most people, that's what makes or breaks games. Is the grinding fun, or is it tedious? Deepwoken is not going to be your typical bandit beater, but at the same time, the progression is not going to be the same as a full PvP game like Rogue Lineage. The game will have a healthy mix between PvE and PvP, And you'll be able to progress and unlock the endgame content by doing either of these things, or some combination of the two. This gives the players lots of options and ensures that they don't get bored while grinding for stats. While you do have the ability to go completely PvE, you're still at risk of being attacked at any time by any player. And it adds that element of excitement and risk that full PvE games don't have. As well as this, the AI are some of the smartest AIs that we've seen on the Roblox platform. You're not going to be able to cheese an NPC just by standing behind a wall or going to high ground. And the humanoid NPCs, who have the same melee combat as you, they won't repeat the same attack pattern over and over again like some games in like Demonfall. They mix up their attacks just like any other player, and as a result, this makes the combat more difficult, and you're actually at risk of dying each time you fight an NPC. When progressing in PvP, you get less rewards from killing new players, so you're more incentivized to fight people your skill level. This should make stuff like boosting or killing ults less viable, and it should make the game less toxic in general. So for PvE progression, you don't just have to go out and kill random NPCs that you see, you can do events and quests. The footage that you're seeing right now is of Infinasu doing this one mission. The mission is to retrieve this one crate from this one building in the Isle of the Crows. If you've played a game like Notoriety, it's sort of similar in the sense that you can use a mix between stealth and loud tactics. This group attempted to do it stealthily by dispatching off one of the guards who was overseeing the area, climbing on top of the building and breaking a hole through the roof. If you get caught by an NPC in an area that you're not meant to be, and you don't kill them in time, then they will alert nearby NPCs. If you're strong enough, you don't really have to care about stealth, you can just go through the front entrance and kill everyone. But these stealth mechanics makes it so that these missions aren't going to be boring, you'll actually have to plan these things out with your friends before doing it. Currently, this mission and the Fort Merit mission, which is where you have to retrieve prisoners from a small island, which is like a prison island, are the two quests that we know of, and there's actually like a story and a lore between them. So a major theme in Deepwoken is racial conflict, and specifically between the Adrets and the Etrians. Those two races hate each other, and so the Fort Merit mission is basically you picking a side and freeing the prisoners from the Adret. Missions like these are much more immersive than just kill 12 bandits like you see in every other Roblox game. As well as these missions, there are also NPC events which happen across the world. These events happen randomly, and when you do come across them, it'll be a complete coincidence. You could just be traveling across an island, minding your own business, and then suddenly you see a group of nomads being attacked, and you have the option to help them, and if you do, you get a chest and some rewards. There are also events that occur on the sea, like you could be traveling across the seas and sailing, minding your own business, and you come across two pirate ships fighting each other, and at first glance you probably think that these are two player factions fighting each other, but when you go closer you realize these are NPCs. NPC ships can fight each other and have ship battles. In Deepwoken, the world doesn't revolve around you, the player, you're just a part of it. That being said, you do have the option to go in and interrupt that fight, and make a decision based on who you want to help. And that leads us in to our next topic, which is reputation. So reputation is basically how NPCs see you. You could be good friends with one group of NPCs, and the biggest enemies of another group. This all depends on how you've previously interacted with that group. If you've helped them with quests and done jobs for them, then they're gonna like you, and if they see you being attacked in one of their areas, they will actually help you. They will stop the person who's attacking you and try and help you kill them. On the other hand, if you hunt down all their members and try and kill them, then they will hate you, and if you go through any of their areas, then you'll be attacked immediately. This is why decision making is so important in Deepwoken, because these things are going to affect the rest of your playthrough unless you go in and change every past decision that you've made. Going back to the example of the NPC pirate event, like you see two factions fighting each other, based on your reputation that you want to have with these two groups, you can make a decision. So if you want to be friendly with both the groups, then you don't want to help either of them, because that way you would have to kill one of the groups, and that would lead to them hating you. If you just want to be friendly with one of the groups, then you could kill the other group. But you'd have to understand that your reputation with that group would go down tremendously. Alright, that's enough about reputation. Let's move on to stats, talents, and boons. So stats in Deepwoken are the most basic form of progression. There are 6 stats: strength, fortitude, agility, intelligence, willpower, and charisma. And there's something called power, which is separated from the rest of the stats. As well as this, there are individual stats for each of the elements. The stat system is still up in the air, and it's pretty hard to talk about without wildly speculating. But pretty much all you need to know is that you can specialize in a stat that you want, and that will influence your playstyle greatly. For example, having all your stat points in agility will make it much easier for you to do parkour. As well as this, Power is likely the master stat, which is something similar to levels in other games. So talents are another form of progression that are tied to your stats, which are like passives. You can only choose a certain amount of talents, and they require a certain amount of stats for each one. For example, the talent called Duelist Stance requires 25 strength and increases the amount of posture that you gain each parry by 25%. The buffs that the talents give are quite niche and only apply in certain circumstances, but when they do go off, they are quite significant, because 25% posture can mean the difference between you being godbroken and potentially winning a fight. Talents aren't always going to be combat buffs, they can also apply to make your life easier outside of combat. Talents give your build a lot of diversity, and you have a lot of options when it comes to choosing which talents for the stat that you want. Keep in mind that the requirements for using a talent is only going to be one specific stat, it's not going to be more than one stat, so you aren't locked in to changing your build completely if you want to get a passive. So the next thing, boons and flaws, are similar to talents, but you don't unlock them in game, you choose them when you're customizing your character. Boons and flaws are advantages and disadvantages that apply to your character. These are not randomized like your race, and you can choose the boons and flaws that you want to. So the boons are good buffs that apply to your character, and if you have one boon, then you need to have one flaw to counteract it. If the boon that you chose is a really strong one, then you might need to have two flaws. Some example of boons and flaws are clumsy, hemophilia, adept, and seasick. These boons and flaws aren't too significant, but they are things that can add a bit more uniqueness to your character. Next, let's move on to items. There are a lot of cool and unique items that we've seen in Deepwoken, but we don't really know what they do. There's stuff like sparks, cores, weapon manuals, codexes, dumbbells, and all of the ingredients that you can make potions with. You'll be getting a lot of your items as rewards from missions, and others you'll be creating from the crafting system. You also have to know how to cook food with the recipes, and it's important to stock up on ingredients when you need them. There are seemingly rare items such as the mask that YPC Nate wears in all of his Deepwoken videos, but it's anyone's guess as to how this is obtained. Next, let's move on to the economy in Deepwoken. So Deepwoken has more of a focus on player economy than a game like Rogue Lineage, which you sell stuff to NPCs. You can sell your items to people who want those items, and you can buy them from people who are selling them, but presumably you'll have to actually meet up with those players, so make sure you're prepared and armed in case you get ambushed. Deepwoken uses a currency called notes, and that's the currency that the NPCs accept when they sell their services. For example, to buy armor reparation from the blacksmith, you need to pay him in notes. Another way that you can get notes is probably from doing missions. Either way, there will be some way to get this currency, because the services that are in game make sure that it needs to be an inflationary currency. If there was no supply, then the amount of notes would go to zero in a few weeks or days, depending on how fast that people consume it. I think player economy is going to dictate a lot of how you play the game, and I think it's going to be a lot more important than people think. The next thing I want to talk about is player customization. So in Deepwoken, you'll have a lot of options to change the way that your character looks, and obviously you'll be able to change how your build plays too. So first, in Deepwoken, there are a lot of cosmetics that you can get, such as earrings and glasses that sort of match the aesthetic of the game. You'll probably be able to buy this for in-game currency, and it won't be locked behind Robux purchases. As well as this, you have lots of options when you want to choose your armor, which isn't just cosmetic, it actually provides advantages too. So in Deepwoken, there are damage types, so there's like slashing damage and blunt damage. So if you punch someone, that's blunt damage. If you hit someone with a sword, that's slashing damage. And so some armors are better at protecting against some types of damages. And so you just want to pick your armor accordingly. Some can do special things like have fire resistance, and some are just all-rounded armors. So you just want to choose one which fits your playstyle. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is Deepwoken's map. Deepwoken is currently split into two worlds, the Etrian Luminant and the Depths. The Etrian Luminant is about 4 times the size of the Depths, and it's about double the size of Gaia and Rogue Lineage. The map will be segmented, so you're not going to lag out from loading in islands from across the map. As well as this, the content that are actually in the different areas of the map are thematically correct. What I mean by this is that the enemies and NPCs that you see are actually going to match the place that you're in. In Deepwoken, the NPCs aren't always going to be humanoid, there are sometimes monster NPCs. The Depths is an underwater place, and in that place you can find a really massive NPC called the Kistakisi, and it's a shark monster. This just makes the experience more immersive, and it will make the game more challenging if you have to fight against different types of enemies. The Etrian Luminant is where you'll spend most of your time in Deepwoken. Now that you know about the two different worlds in Deepwoken, let me explain how they relate to the theory of wiping. So what we call wiping is when your character loses all your progress. In Rogue Lineage, you wiped if you died 3 times, but Deepwoken's wiping system is going to be a bit different. The theory that I'm about to give you is a lot of speculation, but I'm pretty confident that it's very close to accurate. So when you start the game, you'll spawn in the Etrian Luminant and you'll stay there. If you die 1 time, then your soul will get fragmented. You'll still spawn in the Etrian Luminant, and your health bar will turn muddy, and you'll get some indicators that something isn't right. If you die another time, then your soul will leave your body, and you'll get transported to the depths. Whilst you're in the depths, you have to escape and get back to the Etrian Luminant by some unknown method. But if you die while you're in the depths, it's game over, and your character is gone. All your progress is wiped, but you can choose 2 items that you can carry over to your next character. Alright, that's pretty much the wiping theory summed up. The last topic that I want to cover is pricing for Deepwoken. So Deepwoken will not be free, the game is going to be paid access on release, and it's going to cost 400 Robux. As well as this, you'll be able to buy character slots with Robux, which basically serve the same purpose as separate accounts, but they cost a little bit less than buying access for the game. It's been confirmed that you can get free character slots for your character. All of them will have different races, and you can go completely different builds, but they all have to be confined to the same guild. Deepwoken is not going to be pay to win. If they do add non-cosmetic game passes, they're probably going to provide little to no advantage. Alright guys, that pretty much summarizes everything that I have to say about Deepwoken and the important info for the game. Some of what I included was speculation, but I tried to only include things that I thought were very likely to be true. This by no means is meant to be like a master overview for the game. This is meant to be for beginners or people who haven't been inducted to the game properly, or those who just haven't had the time to do research. There's a lot more information about the game that's not in this video, and to check out what those are, I'd advise you to go and check out my Deepwoken playlist, where I cover all these topics in more detail. Thank you guys for watching to the end. If you found this video helpful or informative, then please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me out a lot. Thank you very much, and have a great day.